claiming God's promises. So, Second Peter chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 2 to 4. Grace and peace be multiplied to you in the knowledge of God and of Jesus Christ our Lord, as his divine power has given to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of him who called us by glory and virtue, by which have been given to us exceedingly great and precious promises, that through these you may be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lusts. One of the difficulties I have, and I think people have when you're reading some of the epistles in the New Testament, is that they don't like full stop. So the sentence can go and go and go and go and go and go and go, and there's no full stop. So this whole passage I read didn't have full stop till the end. So sometimes when you're reading a passage and there are no full stops, making meaning of it is a bit difficult. So it's part of the reason why sometimes people read the Bible and they're not really sure what the ideas are about. So, but I will take time to explain what this passage means. This was written by the Apostle Peter, and it assures the Christians of God's promises and God's faithfulness to his promises. I'm going to make 5 statements based on this passage, and then I will make some commentary around every statement, and then we will pray, and then we will have communion. The first statement is that God does what he does because of who he is. God does what he does because of who he is. Let's say that together. God does what he does because of who he is. So God does good things because he is good. God heals us because he is a healer. God provides for us because he is a provider. God protects us because he is a protector. Behind every act of God is the nature of God. Behind the acts of God is the nature of God. God does what he does because of who he is. He doesn't do things simply because we ask him to do it. He does things because it is in his nature to do it. Of course, if we ask him to do it, and what we do is in his nature, then he does it. But if you ask him to do something that is outside of his nature, there is no way he can do it. So if you want God to do something that God does not do, to hate people he shouldn't hate, or he doesn't hate, he will not hate them. To destroy people he doesn't want to destroy, he will not destroy them. God does what he does because of who he is. He cannot do what he is not. So he cannot sin, he cannot lie, he cannot be unjust, and no amount of prayer or fasting or spiritual force will make God do what is against his nature. A man of God cannot pray for God to do what is against his nature, because God does what he does because of who he is. It's very important, so important that we understand that the nature of God is what informs everything that he does. That's the first statement I'm making. Second statement, God does what he does through his divine power. Let's say that together. God does what he does through his divine power. The passage says that God's divine power has given to us all things that pertain to life and godliness. God's divine power is the power that he operates by. We will call it God power. It's his divine power. His divine power created all things. His divine power calls things out of nothing. His divine power keeps order in creation. His divine power gave us life. His divine power opened the Red Sea. His divine power overthrew Pharaoh's armies. His divine power provided a pillar of fire by day and a pillar of cloud by night. A pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. His divine power raised a shepherd from the backside of the desert called David and made him a king. His divine power fed 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread. His divine power raised Jesus from the dead. His divine power has destroyed all principalities and powers and dominion. His divine power turned a persecutor called Saul into an apostle called Paul. And that same divine power is at work in our lives today. God does what he does, not because of the forces of the earth, but because of his divine power. And his divine power existed before creation. His divine power is what brought creation into being. There is nothing, therefore, in creation greater than the divine power of God, because all things came from his divine power. Third statement: God's nature and presence is his promise to us. When we talk about God's promises to us, we are talking about God's nature and God's presence. That is the promise. Whatever God desires for us is his promise to us. Whatever he desires for us. Even if he doesn't promise anything to us, his presence is a promise. God does not have to say, I have promised you something for it to be a promise. Just his presence is a promise. Let me give you an illustration. When a rich and a generous person is in the midst of poor people, his presence is a promise to them. What do I mean? Now, those of you who sometimes travel to your village to visit sometimes your elderly relatives, your folks in the village, you can tell how your presence changes the atmosphere in your village home. That's your old aunt, your old uncle, your grandpa or grandma. And the moment you enter the house without saying anything, without saying, oh, I've come with money from Accra, I've come to help, I've come to what, you just there, everybody changes their attitude. They smile broader, there is more relief, and then your grandma will say, hey, life was hard though, and these few days it's been very hard, but now that you have come, we are happy. You haven't said anything, but your presence is a promise. Just being there assures them that life will get better. The light bill will be paid. They will eat something sweet or nice today. Why? Because you are there. Did you promise you do it? No. But they know so far as you have come, their life will be better. That is what God's presence is to us. He doesn't have to say anything. He doesn't have to promise anything. But when he is there, everything will be all right. When he is there, our needs are met. When he is there, our prayer is answered. God does not have to promise you anything. His presence is a promise to us. You know, the people in the Bible, they didn't have a Bible. Did you know that? The people in the Bible didn't have a Bible. Abraham didn't have a Bible. He didn't have a Bible to go and open and say, according to Isaiah so and so and claim a promise, because Isaiah wasn't born when Abraham was there. Noah didn't say, well, as God did to Abraham, so I believe, because when he was there, Abraham had not been born. So how did they receive from God? They didn't receive by reading the promises of God. They received by trusting the presence of God. His presence was their promise. His nature was their promise. And so far as God was there, every need of theirs was met. And that is the foundation of every promise of God. His nature and his presence. He is good, he will do us good. He is merciful, he will show us mercy. He is gracious, he will show us favor. He does for us the things he does because of who he is. And wherever he is, his presence and his promises are with us. The more, fourth statement, the more we know God, the more we trust his promises to us. God's great promises have been given to us through the knowledge of God. Through the knowledge of God have been given to us exceedingly great and precious promises. We have to know God. These days, people know their church. They know their pastor. They know a man of God, a woman of God, but they don't know God. But the passage says God's promises come to us through our knowledge of him. The more you know him, the more confident you are in him. That when he is there and he's present, everything will be all right. Everything will be all right. When you know God to that level, you don't panic in life, because you know once he is there, everything will be all right. Just like your folks back home will know that once you have traveled with your nice car from Accra to come to the village, everything will be all right. They smile broader, they talk more confidently, they actually invite people to their home because they know something is going to cook very soon. Why? My son has come and he's visited us. But you know, in our case, we don't have a son. We have the Creator. He has come to visit us. And because he has come to visit us, everything will be all right. The more we know God, the more we trust his promises. Our confidence in God comes from our knowledge of him. If there is anything I want to encourage you to know God. Don't just know about him, but know him. Know him. Know his nature. And when you know his nature, there are some things that you know will never happen, because the nature of God will not permit it to happen. If you know the nature of God, you know everything about him. Fifth and final statement. The passage tells us that through God's promises, we partake of his divine nature. Through God's promises, we partake of his divine nature. What we call miracle, or what we call breakthrough, is simply God being himself. When God is himself, we call it miracle. But to God is he being himself. So the nature of God is miraculous. The nature of God is supernatural. The nature of God is power. The nature of God is might. The nature of God is glory. So who he is his nature. And so when we know his promises, we partake of his nature. And today, we will partake of the nature of God because he is here. I like the song they sang, "The Lord bless you and keep you." That is the blessing that God said we should speak over his people. From generation to your generation, to your children, to your children, to your children. He will bless you. And when you know God, you know there is no way you cannot be blessed, because God carries blessing. And wherever he is, blessing is. No one can curse you. They may say it, that's their prerogative, but it will not land, because you are blessed. Why are you blessed? Because God is blessing. Of his fullness we receive. We are blessed because he carries blessing. We are healed because he is a healer. We are favored because he is the favoring one. He carries the favor. And this morning we want that to frame our prayer today, that because of who God is, we receive from him. I don't know what your need is, but the presence of God is your answer. Whatever your need is, the presence of God is the answer.